And we have quite a number of participants who have already joined, and I welcome you all to this session. Good afternoon. This seminar is going to be on teacher development. Thank you all for joining, and thank you to the organizers in Vilnius as well. My name is Simone Klinger. I work at the Center for Language Pluralism and Didactics at the University of Graz. And I have the pleasure of introducing to you today Marjorie Rosenberg. Marjorie Rosenberg has been teaching English to corporate clients and running teacher training courses for over 30 years in Graz. She held a variety of English courses at the Center for Language Pluralism, Lingualism and Didactics at the University of Graz and carried out several research projects with students in the field of learning styles, as well as this research project dealing with teacher wellness, which she will present today. Her publications include a number of course books and several methodology books for for English language teaching. In addition to teaching and writing, Marjorie has been active in teacher associations and was chair of Teachers of English in Austria and is past president of International Association of Teachers of English as a Foreign Language. So before I hand over to Marjorie, just to let you know, after the presentation, there will also be time for a discussion. If you have any comments in between, just write them in the chat. I'll note them down, but you can also use your voice then. If the number of participants doesn't explode in the next few minutes, you can also use your voice and we can have a real discussion. And also, if you would like to have a PDF version of the slides, just let me know and I can send you, or Marjorie can send you them a version per email. So you can take the floor now, Marjorie.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Simone. Wonderful to be here. I told Simone earlier that I've never been to Vilnius, but would love to go because my grandparents on my father's side came from Vilnius, immigrated to the United States the early 1900s, but I've never gotten there. So we're taking a look today at a research project that is based on a webinar. I'm going to explain all of this as we go through, and it was called Getting Unstuck, Stretching Out of Your Comfort Zone. So here's a little bit of information about the webinar. This particular talk was done for the first time in Frankfurt, Germany, as part of their local teacher association conference, LTAF. And I was asked to do a talk on how teachers get stuck in a place and what we can do to change that. Since then, this talk has expanded and grown and provided an amazing amount of information for me. And when I was asked to do a research project, I thought this would be an interesting topic and spoke to a friend who runs an online company, and we recorded it as a webinar and promoted it through his platform and invited people to watch. So people watched the webinar, and then this was followed up with a survey, which was online that people could fill in. So I'm going to go through the details of this. And the idea here behind the talk and the research project is that it is possible to help teachers stretch out of comfort zones. If we provide them with ideas, resource, and help that they can use, it is possible to find new methods, new ideas, and new ways of working. So within the webinar itself, I took 8 defined areas, which I'm going to explain to you, of ways that we could stretch. I thought about my own experience. I've been teaching English now for 40 years in Austria, and all the different things I've done. So took those as an example. Then from there, I asked people in social media what they do in those areas for practical ideas. And I got loads and loads of contributions from people. It was a really interesting thing to look at, and they were put into the webinar. Then I thought about ideas for the classroom. When there was a topic, for example, teaching a different subject, an idea would be to invite, for example, invite the math teacher to your English class and have them talk about what they do in math, for example. And at the end was a list of resources, which were all free. Things like British Council, videos that you can use in the classroom, different types of chats. There's an ELT chat, for example, that teachers can take part in. It's done on Twitter, talking about subjects. So lots and lots of teacher development and classroom material that was in the original webinar that was also in this online one. Okay, so these are the areas that the webinar itself actually looked at. We looked at new methods. People wrote wonderful things to me. New subjects, as I mentioned, new technology. We've all learned about that. I doubt there's a teacher today who doesn't know how to use Zoom. CPD, which is continuing professional development, which is what this is. Learning styles, using a different style than the one we're most comfortable with. Our colleagues, how we work with our colleagues, what we learn from them. Our PLN, which many people didn't know. I'm trying to see in the chat if anyone knows what this is. Anyone know what the PLN is? If you know, you can type it in. No, okay. What it stands for is Personal Learning Network. And at the last talk I gave, which was for the Teacher Association in Israel, they decided to call it the Professional Learning Network or the Passionate Learning Network. And this is something that is developed mostly online through social media. I have got several that I'm involved in. Some are for course book writers. We ask each other questions all the time, or for seminar presenters, for other teachers, and we support each other through a network in which we help each other and give each other tips, advice, and simply encouragement. And the last one was a new area of ELT, which could include writing, could include translating, all kinds of things. So, oops, so I was in the chat. Okay, there we go. So what happened in the webinar, I had 24 ELT teachers, teacher trainers, authors, authors and writers, made a spelling mistake there, around the world. 22 countries were represented, which was wonderful. This really made it very international. And they gave me incredible tips and ideas, which I then put into the webinar. So then I decided I needed to see what the research says about stretching out of your comfort zone, because this was my information. And in the business world, I found this wonderful graph called the comfort zone. So when we're in our comfort zone, we feel completely safe and in control. That's clear. When we begin to stretch, we move into the fear zone. We might lack self-confidence, or we find excuses. Well, I can't do that because we're affected by others' opinions. Well, so-and-so said that I should or shouldn't. When we move beyond that, we can move into the learning zone and we begin to deal with these problems. We learn new skills, as we have all done in the online teaching, and we extend the comfort zone. And then when we finally move on to what's actually the growth zone, that's where we begin to find purpose. We live our dreams. We can set new goals and conquer objectives. And if we look at this in the context of COVID and what this has done for teachers over the past year and several months, think about where you were when it started last February or March, feeling safe and in control, and suddenly we needed to change things, to move online, to change our teaching methods. And at this point, I would guess that most of us are in the growth zone. We have discovered so much new information, new things about ourselves, about our students, and so on. So I'm guessing that's where most of us now are. From the world of schools, I found information from New Zealand, which was research on overcoming fear through adversity education, and so on, which was very difficult for students. This was in sports education. Students or children were asked to do certain things in sports that were new and a bit beyond their normal capabilities. And they were observed on how they did this. And then the emphasis was placed on how they actually learned in what was called the stretch zone and the growth that they experienced. And then in the world of teacher education, Head and Taylor took a look at what happens in teacher training when teachers take on new tasks in teacher development, which is a bit different than teacher training because it's more personal development. What happens when we go into coaching or voice training, when we include the interpersonal skills, and then looking at timelines to identify patterns and areas of growth. And this was something that I also did in the webinar. I made my own timeline because I was curious, where did I start as a teacher back in 1982, actually, in Graz, beginning with some books and teaching some adults. Where was I then and where am I now? And what happened along the way? What were all of the milestones that took place? For example, I learned to be a Cambridge examiner probably only 10 years ago. And that was a whole growth experience. That was very, very new to me. And it was fascinating. And when people tell me they're feeling stuck, I often say, make a timeline. See what you've already accomplished, which gives you confidence to go on and try other things. So other ways to grow include mindsets. Carol Dweck, who has written the seminal book on this, I would say, when we look at our growth mindset, or people with a growth mindset, we don't feel that those basic qualities are set. So for example, as a language teacher, one of the first things we hear from students are, I'm not talented in languages. Okay, what does that mean? That means you're stopping yourself from learning a language. I felt the same way. I tried to learn French back in the United States in high school, didn't do very well, came to Austria, and within 2 to 3 years, I was managing in German. There was a different mindset. So when we cultivate this and we thrive on challenges, we can grow. But if we keep our fixed mindset, it keeps us where we are. And this is a big topic, especially in Graz, where we have several people working on this, teacher well-being. It's a fairly new area. I was very pleased as president of IATEFL to be able to invite our colleague Sarah Mercer to give a talk, to give a plenary on this at our conference. And this is an incredibly important area. We often looked at student well-being, but what about teacher well-being? Such an important part of what we do. Identifying the mindsets and then spotting our own strengths is something that I always encourage when I do any kind of teacher development. Okay, the methodology behind this was based on thematic analysis, which is looking at qualitative data and analyzing it, describing the data, and finding the common themes and repeating patterns, which was a very interesting thing to do because I had people from around the world. It was wonderful to have different areas represented in this particular project. Okay, so the survey had 2 parts. The first part was very basic. Why did people attend the webinar? Those who did. There was also a recording. How old they are, where they lived and work, which is different from where they're from, what area of ELT they were in. Do they teach in primary school, secondary school, university, adult ed, etc.? The numbers of years they were teaching and their employment status, which is a major consideration because we have people who are full-time employed, which is very different than being freelance and working many different jobs. So that was the basic information. And then the survey itself went into the specifics that I wanted the information on, if people feel stuck at all. Some said they didn't. And if so, how stuck do you feel? And then we looked at the factors that stop people from trying out new things, other areas that they felt they could try, ideas that they use, the conditions they need, the resources they need, and then at the end, what helped them in the webinar. Okay, so I'm just looking to see if there is anything here that is a question so far. What ELT meant. Okay, English language teaching. Yes, sorry. Very used to using these kinds of abbreviations in our everyday language. Okay. Oops. So the other thing that I did, okay, CPD is continuing, continuous or continuing professional development, which includes conferences, webinars, and so on. Okay. The other thing that was offered in the survey was short-term mentoring. At the very end of the survey, I said, if you would like to submit a learner diary and get some personalized input from me, please feel free. And this happened, 4 people did it. And I got to meet one at a conference, which was great. And the other one I was supposed to meet just before COVID hit. So hoping that that's going to be possible later. Okay, so we're moving on now to the findings. Altogether, I had 63 respondents. It's not a huge amount, but it was still a nice number from 30 countries and 5 regions of the world. The advantage of doing this online, of course, was that it wasn't limited to just my students in Graz. And we had a very wide spread of teaching experience and age groups. So this was interesting. The reasons for watching, if you see the top one, they knew me, which was very interesting. But we also had a number of people that wanted to stretch, found it of general interest, or felt stuck. We also had people who didn't watch and filled in the survey. But because that was not actually tracked separately, I can't say what the differences made. They still answered the questions, or they left some of them blank. So the comments here, it seemed to be a personal factor. People who knew me as a presenter or as a teacher or as a colleague were interested. But also the idea that people are looking for ways to grow. And one of the first things I said in the webinar is, when we teach, we are in our own little worlds. Now, at university, we're very lucky to have a teacher's room or a staff room. The first time I experienced this was on a summer course in the UK. As an adult ed teacher, adult education, I had never had this. We went to our courses, we saw our students. We might see our colleagues in the parking area and say, hi, I hope you had a good evening or a good class, and that was it. There was very little chance to actually find a way to relate to others. So very often teachers feel they don't have enough contact with others, and the personal factor is important. So general interest in the topic and feeling stuck because they really don't know where to go. So this was the age of the respondents, which was also interesting. If you notice, it skews towards the older group. Those that watched it were the 46 to 59-year-olds. We had a couple of 60 pluses who were obviously still working or interested, and then we had a large number in the 36 to 45 age group. And this was the way the teaching experience came out. Those between 16 and 20 years and 21 to 30 years were the highest groups. And they're still interested in continuing professional development and in finding out new methods and new ideas. This was something I found incredibly encouraging. So if we look at it, 75% of the respondents between 36 and 59 of age, and 38% have been in the profession for up to 16 years. And 62 for more than 16 years, which is really interesting. So my conclusion here is that feeling stuck is more apparent among older teachers and those who have been teaching longer, which I'm assuming is because the longer we do it, the more entrenched we are in what we always do. We tend to do the same thing over and over, and we might feel frustrated with it. Younger teachers are still learning their jobs, and maybe they're simply finding new things more readily than those of us who've been teaching for a long time. The reason for it didn't come out, but that would be something to look at with further research. It would be interesting to find out why. Respondents were located. You can see the largest group was in Europe. We had a large group from the Middle East. Don't know why. I think it was due to a couple of people that knew me and got their colleagues to watch. And then it was fairly split between Africa, Asia, and South and Central America. And here I'm guessing that it was also the time factor. Those who watch the webinar live may not have been able to access it easily in Asia or in South America. I don't know. But those watching from Europe and the Middle East, it was at a convenient time for them. But once we actually combine this with other data, it seemed that people who really wanted to stretch were in Asia and the Middle East, and those who wanted possibilities were in Africa and Central and South America, which was interesting. This is breaking down the data into smaller bits. Okay. So, area of teaching. Now, this does not add up to 63 because people have more than one job. We had a large number in adult ed and a fairly large number in secondary. So students from age 11 up to graduation, and of course, tertiary. But what this led me to believe, let's do this first. Employed, we had 43%, and self-employed only 17%, which doesn't quite go along with such a large number in adult ed. But what I'm assuming is that a number work in more than one area. So people who have a job in a high school may also have an adult ed class, or people working at university also teach an adult ed. And that would make more, that would explain why these numbers look this way. 84% were in adult ed, secondary or tertiary, which I also understand. I think that this kind of webinar is probably geared more towards that particular age group than primary. I don't know if primary school teachers get more information, how many of them are teaching English. I think it's a slightly different area. And as I said, 68% employed seems to imply that those have employed status at school or university, but also work in adult ed. So the specific data, having a look at this, these are the people that said they felt stuck. 9 said yes, 12 said no, not sure why they watched, but the largest number was sometimes. And the extent, most people took the middle column, which is maybe part of the way surveys work, but it may also simply be the way it is. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And then we also, on both sides, the highest rate of being stuck was at 1, the lowest was 5, and this is the way it would normally come out. So 86% felt stuck or sometimes stuck. And when it's combined with other data, more than half of those teaching for 11 to 30 years felt stuck. and more than 30 sometimes. And those starting out really didn't feel stuck yet. So it could indicate that comfort zones are recognized by teachers with more experience, but new teachers are not settled into one yet. It's also possible. So the barriers to new things. The information that was asked for is on the right side. So you can see that the highest was lack of time. And I think this is a pretty common problem for most teachers. Now, again, this was before COVID times. Whether that's changed, I don't know. Possibly. I'm hearing from teachers that time has blended now, so the teaching and free time seem to just blend into each other. So it might even be more of a lack of time, but that was back then when we did this. And the second highest, number 8, was not knowing what to do. So these were the two areas, but we also had a fair number of people who said it was lack of funds, as well as lack of opportunity. Okay. So here you can see the numbers that said this. And okay, I can't see because I've got the chat in my way here. I'm not sure how to take off some of the other cameras. Is that, Simone, do you know if that's possible? Your camera and mine are not blocking my slides, but the bottom 2 are, or the bottom 3.
I think with your mouse you can move the videos to the side or on top of the.
Yes. Okay, good. I just did that.
Tiles,
yep.
And you can.
Yep.
Yeah, I had
Great.
the same
Perfect.
problem yesterday
Perfect.
too.
Perfect. Okay, now I can.
You don't anticipate beforehand problems that come up.
Yeah, now I can see it all. Okay, so you can see that in Central and South America, Europe, and the Middle East, it was lack of time, and in Europe, lack of funds. But Middle East and Asia was lack of motivation. And I don't know why. I would have to have someone from there tell me if there's a reason for this. All age groups said lack of time. But perhaps the lack of funds in Europe came because there were fewer programs offered to teachers that were free. That I don't know. It could be that certain groups that offer a lot of teacher training do it more in other places. It's very possible. The lack of motivation could come from keeping the status quo and not feeling that you need to do something else. That's another thing I don't know, but this is what came out of the research. Okay, so moving on. And here we have the areas of interest, things that people were interested in finding out more about. And you can see the top 3 were new technology, and that was before COVID, CPD, continuing professional development, and a new area of VLT, which was interesting. Okay, so these were the areas that I asked people about specifically. Okay. So this was the comments. As I mentioned, those were the 3 areas. These were the other things, using new methods and working with colleagues or having this professional learning network online. That was spread fairly evenly. And most of those that were chosen were feasible. People can look at new technology. They can take part in CPD. They can investigate new areas of ELT, and they're at fairly low risk to those who try them out. Okay, now this was another question that I asked. Those who were not stuck, what do they actually do? And we felt this was important because people answered the survey saying, I don't feel stuck. So why don't they feel stuck? When we find that out, we have some answers to give those who want to know what they can actually go on and do. And here you can see those who didn't feel stuck take part in continuing professional development on a regular basis. And as I mentioned, this is webinars, this was conferences. Today, the teacher associations, both TESOL in the United States and IATEFL in the UK, offer webinars galore. There's so much out there that teachers can do. I think for every conference that I present at, there are 2 or 3 conferences going on at the same time online. And for the most part, they are free for teachers. So this is definitely a possibility. The other high one was using new technology. And of course, now with COVID, we have all learned to use even more technology. But even in my time at university, when I began, Moodle was a mystery. And towards the end, I found that Moodle is what helped me enormously to organize my classes. So we all learn new things and take them on and feel more comfortable with them. And then, of course, new methods. And the findings here, those were the top 3. Again, I found that the safer choices were the majority. So technology, when I began teaching back in 1982, we had blackboards and chalk. I found my old chalk and even the chalk holders that teachers gave me so that I didn't have to get my hands filled with chalk. We went from there to, of course, using projectors and PowerPoint presentations. But at university, I still taught using my methods with cards and group work and so on. So we began to integrate a lot. But I did put links to videos and so on Moodle for my students to look at. Of course, engaging in continual professional development, it's a safe thing to do, and trying out new methods and approaches. Trying them out doesn't mean you have to do them. You haven't committed to them, so it's safe. And the lowest number was actually for the new area of VLT, or a new subject. So people seem to be happy teaching and aren't necessarily looking to go into writing or becoming a head of department. Okay. So the question here was, what do you need to be able to stretch? And the big answer was time. This came up earlier. And the next was funds and opportunity. And I think this makes sense to pretty much everyone. If you don't have time, you're happy to stay where you are. You feel like you're paddling upstream in a boat and you don't have time to think about anything new. You're just keeping up with what you're doing. But when you have time, you do have that chance to investigate other things. So the lack of time and funds equal the earlier responses. But opportunities and support may be lacking. And the opportunities could be you don't know where to turn. Support can be either from colleagues, bosses, or family. It could be that there just isn't the time to take part in another webinar. Lots of things are going on now on weekends. People say, I'm sorry, that's family time. So it's very difficult to find those chances at times to go ahead and do something for yourself. And the additional comment, it was in other, people said they needed more time to recharge their batteries. And I think this is something that all of us absolutely understand. So the resources, this was interesting, what came out here. People said they wanted to have access to online sites with magazines, journals, and articles, which would be teacher development. So learning about what you can do as a teacher. But they were also interested in webinars, but in addition, they were interested in things for the classroom. So if we have a look here at the findings, 2/3 were looking for professional development, and 1/3 were interested in classroom resources. Now, the answer here, the reason this skews so far to professional development could very well be why they chose this webinar to watch. If they're looking only for sources of things to do in the classroom, they would probably choose something else. This question was, what was helpful in the webinar? And here we had, you can see the examples of what to be done in class was the highest, which was very interesting. But these examples were of new things. These were the examples that came both from the crowdsourcing I did. There was one who, the new method she said was to use bit strips, which is a way of creating comics with young learners. Others said using TPR, total physical response, with adults, which is something very new. Things like that. People really found that helpful. The list of resources was considered helpful, and the experiences of others. So the examples that I gave and what the crowdsourcing did, people found useful. And here you can see these were the things and the possible areas to stretch into in general. The answers that were not consistent were when people said they wanted more CPD was earlier, but here the top one was more classroom ideas. Why that came out differently, I don't know, but it did in this particular case. And perhaps teachers do need more time for self-reflection. It's very possible that that is what we're lacking. So the mentoring results, these were the 4 people that sent the learner diaries. One said at the beginning that just had a lack of self-confidence, but took part in more continuing professional development and began working with other teachers. And this helped to increase the self-confidence, and the person felt much better about their own development. Another had been head of an English department and found that this was just not what the person wanted to do, trying to stay away from genders here, and organized a teacher association for the country the person lives in, which is still running, and found that this was much more satisfying work. So that would be in the area of a new area of ELT. Another person had a problem with a course they were teaching and invited the graduates of that course to come and talk about it with the teacher and the current students. And apparently this solved the problem. And the last person was having problems with colleagues and feeling very discouraged about the work they were doing, and was encouraged to write for an online magazine. There are several which will publish articles, felt better, and by doing that, felt they could actually convince others to take on new ideas. So this mini mentoring program also turned out to be successful with this research project. So my conclusions from this, it really seemed that the webinar filled a need. People do feel stuck, do feel they are looking for something new, are looking for ways to expand, and by breaking it down into areas, it seemed to make it easier. But I would absolutely say that further work needs to be done on this. Need to find out what else people can do, what happened with those who did the survey and went on to try those new things. What did they find? Did they expand? Did they get into a new area? Did they leave their comfort zone? This would be very interesting to follow up on. It's very clear that growth zones go together with growth mindsets. For anyone who has not read any of Carol Dweck's material, I would definitely recommend her book on mindsets for both teachers and for students. The lack of time was a major problem, but not lack of interest. I found this to be the most encouraging part of this research, is that teachers did say, I really want to do it, I just don't know when. And lack of time is something we can perhaps help with. Lack of interest, I think, is more difficult. And their willingness to take part in continuing professional development and learn new technology was also very encouraging. It also came out in all of this that the fear of the unknown was really helped by support from others. And the goal of this particular webinar and the research was to both create and support teacher well-being in order to help growth. When we help growth of teachers, we obviously help growth of pupils as well. A healthy teacher can produce or encourage a general feeling of health in the classroom and encourage our students to keep learning. And in the years I have been teaching, I see this over and over again, that when we are positive, we have so much more of a chance of helping our students to learn. So moving forward, as I mentioned, teacher wellness is a huge topic today. We do need more work on this. We need to examine it. We need to work with it. We need to realize it's there. We need to acknowledge it and say, this is something that has to be considered. Just having that teacher's room that teachers can sit together and chat in can lead to teacher wellness, supporting each other, helping each other, sharing ideas. Some of the teacher associations have started doing this. IATEFL Hungary, for example, has started what they call the Creative Cafe, and they've continued it during COVID. They run them once a month, and teachers come and share some idea they use with students with others. It's kind of a swap shop. And they encourage each other. People say, oh, I could do that, or I could adapt that, or I can try that out with this group. This is helping teachers to be better teachers, which gives us self-confidence. So creating spaces for teachers to share. That's what this Creative Cafe does. One of the conferences I was at, one of the last face-to-face conferences actually, had 2 swap shops, which I can write in the chat. I'll do it when we're finished, where teachers came and presented their ideas. And this is a space to let teachers say, I've done this and it works. An activity I am still doing, and I'm guessing I've been doing it for 30 years, was given to me by a teacher who said, I tried this out today. It's a drawing on a piece of paper. I tried this out today. My students loved it. They sat back to back. One had the drawing, the other didn't, and they had to describe it to each other. And I still use it, and my students still love it. And that was because somebody handed me a piece of paper after a class. Encouraging everyone to try out new things. If somebody says, I don't know if I can do that, well, the worst thing that can happen is you fail. And you can tell the students, we're going to try this out. I'm hoping it's going to work. And if it doesn't, okay, well, we tried. And if it does, you tell them, hey, you're all part of this wonderful experiment. If we put a positive spin on it, they're very willing to do that. Creating this personal timeline to see accomplishments. I would really encourage everyone in this webinar to do this. Put that timeline together. Go back over your years of teaching and see when you did what. And I had to go back and find my first conference presentation, which was sometime in the 1990s, I think. Since then, there have been quite a few conferences in between. All the different things that I have tried and done, different courses I took, and so on. But it gives you a feeling of what you have done. And that is important. And then setting up your own personal or professional learning network. Mine is at work constantly on a nonstop basis. I'm in several. I'm in one for business English, which is one of my main areas. And then I'm in the ones for writers and for presenters. And we constantly ask each other questions and encourage each other. Okay, so these were the resources that were in the webinar. You're going to be getting the PDFs of this. British Council has got loads and loads of both teacher development and stuff for the classroom, free. EFL Talks is the platform that I ran the webinar on. These are free webinars, and they consist of talks of 10 minutes each. Each talk has 10 slides, and the talks are 10 minutes. They are run by Rob Howard, who set these up in order to offer continuing professional development to teachers around the world. The ELT chat, I mentioned it. They choose a topic and they tweet about it for an hour a week. ELT Picks, and you'll have this, you can check all the websites. ELT Picks was begun, about 10, 15 years ago by teachers. They are photos online for teachers to use. They stopped taking new ones, but there are at the moment close to 30,000 photos for teachers to use for free in the classroom, in presentations. You just can't publish them in a book, but they are there, and they're organized in albums, things like emotions, everyday items. Can you guess what this is? Wonderful photos. TED Talks. They range from a couple of minutes to longer talks. I've used them in class. Wonderful. The No Project was begun by a colleague in Greece. This is a project to train young youth ambassadors against human trafficking. And there are lesson plans. It's all for free. Very interesting materials. And then Vicky Hollis Simple English videos, which are also free. They range from teaching vocabulary and grammar to teaching functions like how to make telephone calls, how to greet visitors, and so on. This was my bibliography, which you will also get. And I would like to thank you and thank Arqus for the opportunity to talk about this. And now we are up to questions. So I will make the chat bigger. And I'm going to try to put my PDF here. Let's see.
If not, Marjorie, I asked everyone to send me a private message, and I got quite a few responses. So
okay, well, it's also here.
Is it there? Okay, great.
But
that's
I can send
it.
Okay, well, I'll send it to you afterwards as well. So we've ended a bit early so that you can ask some questions. Do you want to moderate this, Simone? And we see that.
Yes, I'm happy to moderate. I know Andreas just raised his hand.
Yes.
Sure, Andreas, would you like to ask your question?
Yes. Thank you. Thanks a lot. First of all, thanks a lot for amazing presentation, actually, and of course we are looking forward to having you here in Vilnius.
I would love to come. Absolutely.
Be it on Erasmus annual conference in October or any other time, we would be happy to welcome you here. My question is related to I wrote it in the chat, but I'll try to expand it a little bit. Well, basically, you identify the barriers for participating in different activities, lack of time, lack of money, etc. And then you identify the things that help to feel, not to feel stuck, like continuous professional development, using new methods, reaching out to technology,
right,
and stuff like that. I would doubt that using these things are directly, that relationship between using these things and not feeling stuck is directly causal. I would guess, but it's just my guess, that there are some other factors that leads to using these things and not feeling stuck. I hope that I expressed myself clearly, but do these people who use these things and not feel stuck, what are the difference with them? I doubt that they have less time or they have better opportunities money-wise or like that. I think that they have some kind of inner motivation, internal motivation, or any other need.
It's a good question. In researching in an online survey, it's very hard to get to that information from somebody. Why do you use these things? I mean, for me, I was terrified of technology when I started with all this. Luckily, I have a partner who's very good at it, so he helped. And I had colleagues, the colleague I mentioned who runs the EFL talks, whenever I have a problem, I know that I can contact him and he will spend whatever he needs online. We'll Zoom or do it on Facebook, and he talks me through it. So that support is there if I'm panicking. But trying things out. If you don't have the support from somewhere else, or you're just not interested, you just don't want to do it. I can't say what the hidden motivation is for those. All I wanted to know was what those people who said, I don't feel stuck, what are they doing that goes along with that, I don't feel stuck? And those who said they didn't feel stuck, it was only those who answered that question. Those are the things they already do. So that was the point of that question. I hope that helps. I mean, it may not be the answer you're looking for, but it's the best answer I can give.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Arqus Schmidt.
Yes, hello.
Please.
I was wondering, do you think that there should be kind of an institutional policy to identify teachers who are stuck, even if they just don't notice it, so they feel like okay with what they're doing, but in a way to encourage them to promote? Very often, I think in our university, for example, there's lots of offers to do new things and to get trained, but there's no personalized analysis of what you're doing, how you perform, how your, let's say, evaluation results are like. You get them personally, but you can take action, or you can't. If you don't have to. So, do you think there should be a more personalized activity?
I don't want to say what I think should be in another institution. That's really tricky, but perhaps setting up learner diaries for those who do take part in this continuing professional development might be a way to do it. Saying that if you're going to take part, okay, we offer all of this. We offer these webinars and these, when you can do face-to-face training, we have them as well at University of Graz. But to say, we'd like you to take part in this, we would also like you to have your own personalized learner diary, to note down what the differences are, to start becoming, the main thing is to become aware of what you are learning from this. If you're not learning anything from it, it may not be as helpful as actually saying, this is what I have specifically learned to do. I recently wrote or contributed to a book on leadership and reflective practice. And this made me go back and really think about what that meant. As the leader of IATEFL, I learned so much that I really sat down and wrote it down, because it was things that I hadn't realized I was learning at the time. So I think reflective practice may be the answer there. And I think there's a book out, Tom Farrell, I think, just edited one. So that would be something to look at. What are we learning? Very good question.
Thank you.
Yeah. I hope that sort of answered the question. And maybe just have, after several development seminars, have teachers get together and talk about it. What did we learn? I did this with students. Now,
that's also my personal experience. You can learn a lot from your peers, and
yes.
Very often from different fields. It's even easier because you know what's going on in your discipline. But other disciplines have nice methodologies, and you can learn from them very nicely.
Yes. And part of my training was in NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, and I took a course on one for teachers. And at the end of every day, we had the opportunity to raise our hand and say, something I learned today was. And this was excellent. This really made you think, okay, what did I get from today? And so perhaps at the end of, very often we've done this, at the end of teacher training things, tell me something new that you learned. And then what are you going to do with it? That's the next step. Okay, do we have another question? I'm keeping my eye on the time. I think another person had raised their hand. Was there someone else? Anyone else?
I have a question for you, Marjorie.
Sure.
If nobody else is raising their hands, and that is, what was the biggest surprise for you when you were doing this research? And the other thing is, that it's a non-related question, and that is that through the COVID pandemic, I think that a lot of teachers were forced to move out of their comfort zones, deal with new technology, a new way of teaching. Do you think that sparked in any way teachers to then further develop also in other areas, that they realize, I have to do this step, it's painful, I fear it, but I've overcome that fear, I'm growing now, so maybe I will also, has that kind of had an effect then on other areas of teaching?
Okay, the surprise, I guess, was the fact that people took part who didn't feel stuck. That was a surprise. I think I was also surprised by the fact that it was the teachers who'd been in the profession the longest who felt stuck. And then when I thought about it, I realized that the beginning teachers may just be overwhelmed by the job and not thinking about it, or they don't realize it. But I don't know. I can't give the reason to that, but that was a surprise. Perhaps the way it broke down in the data of the areas of what, lack of time or lack of funds, that was a bit of a surprise as well. And whether we've all learned things, I think we have gotten more comfortable with technology. We're also getting zoomed out. That's also happening, which is something that people are saying, looking forward to online. I'm hearing both things from my colleagues, never want to go back to face-to-face, or I can't wait. One thing I learned, I teach a small group of bankers, and I have to use what they use, which is Microsoft Teams. I'm invited in, I'm not the host because it's security protocols. But what I've learned is that I run the class the way I ran it face-to-face. The most important thing is rapport. We start off with, hi, how are you guys doing? How was your week? Just like we did. I use the chat box as a whiteboard. There are certain videos that they play. It's in the course book, but they have to enable them. But I don't need a lot of bells and whistles. I don't need to prepare a PowerPoint presentation, which I didn't do face-to-face. I teach as I taught face-to-face, giving them the chance to talk and to keep our relationship going. And it's been interesting because 2 new people joined the group who I had to integrate, and I've never met them. I only know them from online. So sometimes we have to just keep doing what we were doing. So as the engineers say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If that helps. Anything else? I think we're almost out of time. So for me, this was also a new experience. This is my 134th conference, and I've never presented on research. I have always just, given either a talk on using activities, a workshop on activities, or given a keynote on teacher development. But this is the first time I've done this kind of thing. So you can never stop learning. Great. Okay. Anything else? Glad it was inspiring. And I will check, have to see if the webinar is still online. I will find out. I'll send you that link, Simone, for anyone who wants to actually watch the webinar.
Thanks.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah, thank you very much, Marjorie Rosenberg. I think that was a very interesting presentation. Share your research results with everyone. I'm sure there's a lot of participants who may also want to step out of their comfort zone themselves. I got a lot of requests for your presentation, so thank you so much.
Great. Well, thanks everyone.
And
I'm just typing it. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, I did find it encouraging that there's interest in this, and it's important. Okay, and the sun's still out. Have a wonderful day and take care, everyone. And I hope to see you next time in Vilnius. That would be amazing. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
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 Bye, everyone.
Bye.